All right, we're back. It is COMP229. That's Advanced Web Application Development, and it is in the fall 2016 semester at Centennial, and we are week 6, part 1 of our broadcast. We got to talk about a couple things from an administration perspective right away. First thing is, please remember that next week is your midterm test. Midterm test next week, right? We talked about it over a few times now. There'll be one part of it that's going to be, guys, one part of it is going to be practical, and another part will be multiple choice, true, false, short answer, that kind of stuff, right? The part that will be practical will probably be worth the most, 15%, something like that. And the other part will be worth 5 or 10. I'll let you know exactly how much it's going to be. For the total of between 20 and 25% of your final grade, all right? That's next week, right? So why? It's 4 hours, right? So I'm not going to make you do 4-hour exams. I'm not going to bill it for that long. So you got to figure that the actual, the practical piece should take you no longer than about an hour and a half to 2 hours, okay? For the whole piece, the whole practical part, right? But you'll have access to all your resources during that part. So if you want to answer things like, want to build something, if I've asked you to do something, you can do it. For the first part though, the true, false, multiple choice, it'll be closed book, right? So you'll have to know that part. And it'll be based on the stuff we've talked about up until today, right? So things like, the entity framework, right? Which is, what is the entity framework? And I'll ask you general questions. I'm not going to ask you keyword questions, like, because we haven't talked about those keywords, right? So if I haven't talked about it, it's not going to be on the exam, right? And my guess is it's not going to be that many questions because, again, I want you to do a really quick piece to it. Like I said, maybe 20 questions, something like that, something in that range, 20, 30 questions. And then you're going to be right into your test, into your practical. The online test, again, what I'm going to get you to do is when you're doing it, it's going to be on eCentennial, right? And everyone will have a different test. So you'll get a different version of it. It'll be randomized, so you won't be able to get the same questions. There'll be a test bank of questions that I'll be entering in. I'll probably enter something like 60 questions, just to let you know. And you'll get a percentage of those questions. You'll get like some kind of like 20 out of the 60. So chances are you won't have the same exact test as somebody else. Just letting you know. That's why I'm gearing it up for that, right? Things you should know when it comes to answering questions. For example, if I was to ask you something like, tell me a little bit about what a master page is. What's the master page? What's a master page? Yeah. Right. So that's the kind of question I'm going to ask. So a container, so if I was going to make you match stuff up, I might say something like a master page is, and then on the right, it might be a match question where you say container that, or some kind of template that, for all other pages to give you the same look and feel. That might be a container, on your test. There will not be anything like, tell me what, something like an ORM is. We talk ORM? No. If I don't talk about it, not going to be on the test, right? But if I say to you, what do you think the entity framework is? Well, we've been using entity framework, right? And what are the 3 things? You should know the 3 things that are part of the entity framework. We've talked about those. So there's 3 methods that we can use the entity framework to connect to the database. What are the 3 methods? There's 3 things I mentioned, right? And I'll tell you again, so this is part of the review. There's the database first approach, right? Because that's the most common. The most common approach to using the entity framework is the database first approach, right? That's one of the options, one of the 4 options when we set it up, right? Because there's lots of databases out there, right? And we want to hook into the database and, create our custom classes. That's what the models are. They're just classes, right? From the database. That's the most common approach, right? There's also code-first approach, where there's no database, and I make my classes first, and then I generate the database from my code. And then there's the model-first approach, which is the least common, where I have a model that I draw with the EDMX tools that are built into Visual Studio. I haven't even showed you that part, right? And because the least common, right? And then it generates the code and the database. Again, lots of ways of using the entity framework. All right, so there's going to be questions on these kind of things. The things we've covered, and you get the videos, right? The things we've covered in the first 6 weeks, anything that I've actually talked about and worked with you on, is fair game for me to ask you questions about. Stuff that you should have done with your assignment number 1, right? When you built your little bio page and everything else, your little mini portfolio site, that stuff there is fair game. Anything that I've asked you to do, you should be able to do. If I ask you, What's this control? What does it do? What's a text box? You know, the difference between a text box and a label. I mean, you guys should know those things. Very simple. You know, how do you set up a what's the code behind file? What's the common language we're using for the code behind file? You should know it's C#, and it's not VB or something crazy, right? Like basics we're talking about for the multiple choice true false. And then you'll be asked to build an application, and it'll be a small application. All right. Now, I can't get you to share it on Azure because, again, we talked about this, right? Some people don't have access. Sometimes you have problems. However, I'll tell you right now, if you can get yourself ready for next week, right? If you make it work for Azure, it'll be worth bonus. I'll give you bonus opportunities on the test, right? And the same thing goes with, and again, it's hard to do this, but if I do a database piece, and chances are, do you think there's going to be database on next week's practical test? We've been talking about database for like 3 weeks. Of course there's going to be database on the practical test. If you think there's no database in the practical test, something's wrong with you, right? It's got to be something. If I'm talking, today we're talking about security with database, right? So all the pieces that I've talked about, if I've spent 3 weeks talking about database and data, definitely going to be on the test. That's just like silly not to think about that, right? So so what's going to be on the test? I'm going to get you to build some kind of data store. I'm probably going to provide you, if I'm going to ask you to access data, chances are I'll give you the tables and everything else, just like we did for our little Contoso database. I'll probably give you a SQL file. You load it into your machine. You make, you know, it creates the database for you, right? That'll be the first piece, and then away you go. You connect to the database, all that kind of stuff you have to do on your own, right? And then once you've got that piece done, away you go. Things that I will do next week is I won't allow you to sit with your friends, right? So things like, you know, if you sat all the way before, I'm going to get you to split up and sit, you know, away from each other. So, and there's reasons for that, not because I think you guys are going to cheat, but because I think you might be distracted, right? Especially when people go like this. Oh man, I don't know how to do this piece. I'm gonna hear that a lot next week, right? Because people work together with when they work together, they like, you know, you guys do fairly well on assignments, but when it comes to practical stuff, on average, people are a little bit, you know, they get depressed because they're like, I don't know how to do this piece. One thing is that, remember, you'll have access to your GitHub. You'll have access to my GitHub. You won't have access to anybody else's though. So if I see you accessing anybody else's GitHub accounts, or anything like that, if I see the code that's exactly the same, you and whoever code you grab from, other than me, right, will be 0, right? So that would be a very bad thing. So please don't try and do that. There's lots of ways. You have all the code you need at your disposal because I've given you all the code, right? So all you're going to do is take the code and spin it so it works for you. That's what's going to happen. So I'm not going to get you to write, you know, crazy code out of the blue, because we haven't done that. We've never done that in any one of my demos. We haven't said, okay, today you guys are going to write some crazy code, make me make me crazy about how you're going to do this. Never done that, right? So I'm probably not going to do that on the exam. I'm going to probably say, hey, here's some examples of code, but this is what I want you to do with it. I want you to take the examples we use in class, and now I want you to modify it to create this kind of site. And it'll be something you can build again within about an hour and a half or 2 hours. Okay. I will allow breaks. I will allow you to walk out of the room, all that stuff. No problem, right? But you'll have to hand it in before class, and there's going to be I got to give some time. You won't have exactly all the way to 10:30, right? Because you have to upload things. You have to make sure things are good and whatever, right? So please be prepared. Bring food, because we're going to stay here all day, the entire time, right? I mean, I'm not going to say, okay, guys, it's a break. Go ahead. We've left the exam, and see you later, and I'll come back, right? I might do what I might do, because we have 4 hours. What I might do is do the first part first, the true, false, multiple choice, stop, get you guys to get food or whatever, and then come back and do your practical piece. That I might do, if you guys are okay with that, right? Just to give you guys a break, because 4 hours in an exam is like, I didn't do that in university, right? 4-hour exam, that's crazy, right? So think of it the same thing. So when you do your exam, you'll have your breaks in between, but during the exam and stuff, there won't be any coming or going. Like, if you come late for the first part, you won't be able to do the first part. Just letting you know. So next week we start exactly at 6:30. I'm not going to go to the other side at all, right? Because next week's the exam. If you come in, right, within the first 10 minutes, you'll be allowed to write the exam, the multiple choice. If you come any time after that, for the multiple choice, true, false things, might as well go home. I'm not going to let you in. All right, just letting you know. That's number one. Second thing, right, when you come in. For the second part, it'd be the same thing. If you leave early, if you're finished early, you're gone, and then you come back at, as an example, our first part will be 6:30, and then the next part will start around 8:30, because again, it'll give you approximately about 2 hours, right? So if we do that, you're going to come back at 8:30. See ya. Come back at 8:30. You know, one of those kind of things, or 8 o'clock, whatever we decide. Right? And I'll let you know about that as soon as once the exam has been fully created. I'll know more, and I'll tell you exactly all the instructions for the exam will be given to you next week. Right? Again, you don't have to bring any pens or papers. There will be no printed piece to the exam. Everything will be online. Okay? So there's nothing to print or anything like that. Any questions around the format for next week's exam? Again, a combination of true, false, multiple choice, first part, and then practical, second part. Yes? For you, I'm going to make extra questions. I'm going to give 60 questions for you, right? I'm probably going to target around 20, all right, like I said. And I don't want to make too many because at the end of the day, I don't want this thing to be all-encompassing. I don't want to give too much percentage to this whole thing because the exam is important, but most important is your project work, right? That's the most important to me, right? So I have to do at least one of these, one crazy, test like this, and then for the second half, we'll see. It might be different, right? Any questions around the exam for next week? Again, please come early, right? Please do not come late. If you come late, you're going to be disappointed because I won't let you in, right? I'm talking about like if you come half an hour late, like something like that. Or if you come within 10 minutes, okay. Bus happened, something happened, right? Also, if you can't make it for the exam for whatever reason, something like that, that's going to prevent you from writing the exam because it'll be 2 parts, right? So if you're not there, I can't, you won't be able to write it. Okay. Let's continue with what we've been doing for this. Now, here's something different that I've done for this week. I've got a bunch of code snippets that I've put up on eCentennial. So if you look, I have a login code snippet, a main menu, a register, a nav bar, app, and so on. I've done this for a couple of reasons. One is it's just too long to hand bomb a whole page, right? We don't have time for me to hand bomb a login page. And you've seen forms before. So it's nothing new for you. You're going to see me create a login with a text box and and labels and a button. That's really what I'm making, right? So I've given you the code. There's going to be a point in time where I'm going to go into that code, copy and paste it into the project. So please, up on eCentennial, there's this code, right, that we're going to be using, as well as a link for a walkthrough, right, for us to connect our ASP.NET identity security, right, that's what we're going to be using, to an existing web form site. So there's actually a link that you can go to, right? If you wanted to do this at home later on and try it by yourself, right, the stuff I'm talking about, you can almost follow this example verbatim and you'll be fine. Now, there's going to be some differences because this is for an older version of ASP.NET, right? And it also connects to a local database that's inside of a file, which we will not be using. We'll be using a local database server because we have Visual Studio 2015. I'm hoping most of you with Enterprise, right? Some people are using still Community, don't know why, but you have access to Enterprise, use Enterprise. So these are the files we're going to be accessing today, just letting you know. It's a little different than what we did. Not because I want to cut and paste and not type it out all out. I like typing with you. I really do. We just don't have time, right? So just letting you know. So let's kick off this project. And remember last week, we had a project that we were working with, and it was COMP229, and it was lesson 5, right? We're going to make a template from the project, just like we did last time, because one thing you need to do for next week's exam is I'm going to give you a template, and you're going to make another one from it, right? It can't be named, midterm exam, the one I'm going to give you next week. It's going to have to be named something else. Like, for example, midterm dash the employee, your student number, right? That's what it would be, right? So in order for you to do that, you need to know how to make a template. So please watch carefully, right? If you don't know how to do this next week, it's just going to slow you down when it comes to the practical piece. By the way, I've had some recommendations in the past when it comes to mixing these kind of things up, like practical as well as a written. And they say, I'd rather do my practical first. Some people said, I want to do my practical stuff or get it all done, because I don't know how long it's going to take. Okay, true. But I'm telling you, it's going to be billed for about 2 hours, right? Something like that. Some people may take a little longer, and that's why I'm going to give you a little bit more time than 2 hours, and we'll see how we're going to break up the day. But there will be a break. Like there'll be like a break between one test and the other, right? Because think about this, in real life, if we were doing another day, it wouldn't be like 4 hours, right? We'd do 2 hours for one part, and then 2 hours for the second part, right? So like day 1 would be 2 hours, day 2 would be 2 hours. So it wouldn't be like 4 hours at once. That's too crazy, right? And it would tire you up, and it's not fair. All right, so we've got our last demo that we did last week, and it was COMP229 F2016 lesson 5. So I'm bringing that up from last week. Again, if you follow along, you can see what I'm going to do here. I'm going to launch this project, and I'm going to make a template for the new project, right? Again, this is what I will ask you to do next week, so please pay attention. Oh, one thing I will not allow next week is no video watching. So you can't like watch my videos while you're doing the exam. That just defeats the purpose, right? So please, there won't be any of that. I will be coming around to watch, to do that kind of stuff. But you'll have access to everything else. So I mean, you'll have access to code. You know, you'll have access to Google if you really want to Google something to make it work, and so on. Okay, let's pull this stuff up and see what I need to do. So I'm going to go to File. So I've got my project here, COMP229 F2016 lesson 5, and we did this already one time. I'm going to export template. So File, Export Template. You guys have seen this before. It's a project template, right? And then here's the project. I can have more than one project inside my solution. Right now I only have one. Click Next. And then inside here, I'm going to use the same thing. Lesson 5 is my template, right? I'm not going to change a darn thing, and click Finish. What this will do is it'll create a zip file that'll be inside your templates folder in your Visual Studio 2015 folder. So it'll be a subfolder inside your folder for templates. There it is. It's done. Once your File Explorer comes up, you know it's done. And then I'm going to close my solution. So now F2016 lesson 5 is, for COMP229 is done. Now we're going to start lesson 6. So I'm going to File, New, Project, right? And when I choose a template, just like I did before for last week, I'm going to go to C#, not the web. I'm going to scroll down until I start seeing these funny pictures of my templates, right? And I want to look at COMP229, which is further down for me. And there's lesson 5. Here's lesson 4. Here's lesson 3. Right? I've been doing templates every single time, right? So nothing new. So there it is right there. Okay, now I'm not going to call it lesson 51, obviously. It's going to be called lesson 6, right? And then I do want to check on create new Git repository. Some people forget to do this for whatever reason. They forget to check this create new Git repository or add to source control or whatever. And then they come over and say, I don't know why, but I can't put it in GitHub because you haven't clicked this, right? And then you try and make commits. It'll take your commits, but it'll just forget about everything, right? Press OK. We're going to be, once we create the template, we don't have to go through the selection process where we select web forms, we select all the other stuff. We're going to modify this one, you know, in order for us to add security. And I want to do it this way for a couple of reasons. One, if I was to continue last week's lesson, it would mess it up. I want you to have just an example of, you know, a lesson without security, and this lesson will be with security, right? So you can see the differences, what we've added, what we've changed. You know, if you want to compare it on GitHub for yourself, you'll see those changes, right? Okay, before I do anything else, I want to test this project to make sure it works because I've created a template for my existing project, right? So I'm going to click, you know, run on Chrome. It's going to restore the packages, and if everything goes well, I should be able to connect to the database that I already have in place, right? See a list of students on the front page when I go to my students, right? When I hit that particular nav bar. So it takes a little bit of time to connect. Now again, I'm connecting locally because here at school we're blocked remotely. Okay. So again, if I click students, you can see that's going to take me to a student list, and it should connect just like it did before. Exactly what we did last time. We had the delete. We didn't do the edit. We're going to add that in this week, right? But before we get to that edit piece, because that's one piece we're missing, I want to add in security, right? And the reason why is because that's the thing of our lesson today, right? I'd rather you know how to do that first. Also, when I click delete, right, it just deletes, right? So I want to kind of add a little bit of a piece of code that stops everything from deleting automatically, and I have that in a code snippet, right? If you notice, there's an app.js and an app.css that we're going to take and we're going to use in our code as a code snippet to help us out, and I'll explain how that all works, right? So here's our student list. Okay, good. So now we know that it works. Before I do anything else, I'm going to set up a Git repository, right? A GitHub repository. I'm going to go to Team Explorer. I'm going to go to Changes, and any changes are going to be listed here. Now, for me, all I need to do is go to Home because there are no changes. I'm going to go to Sync, right? And now it's going to ask me for a new repository. I'm going to click Get started because I have my extension for GitHub loaded. And then I'm going to click on Centennial. I'm going to accept the name COMP229 F2016 Lesson 6 and click Publish. And we're done. You have my GitHub. Okay, again, this is security today we're covering. So let's talk about the walkthrough, what we're going to do. I have the link. So if I was to go to the link, right, and if I click on this link here, right, you can see that it pulls up this little walkthrough on how to add ASP.NET Identity to an empty or existing web forms project, right? Now, if you were going to ask me next week, can I use this, right? Because is there going to be security in next week? Yep. Are we going to deal with database? Yes, right? So it's going to be on there. If you want to use it, you can certainly use this walkthrough. It's going to help you. Okay, so what are we doing? We can't do everything that it says in the walkthrough because it starts you off from a brand new project and starts you off with an empty project that does not have authentication. Just like we have right now. We kind of have a project that does not have authentication built in. We want to build it in. And actually, it's one of the easiest things we can do, right? What we're going to be using is something called identity, right? Microsoft Identity, which is a way of connecting to the database, right, and authenticating ourselves, right? That's what we're going to be doing. We'll talk about identity in more length in the second half of this course. We'll go into more details about entity framework. I've scratched the surface of entity framework. We're just getting you to use it the first half, right? Second half, we're going to do more security, talk about identity a little bit more in depth and stuff like that with authentication and authorization. Here, we're just setting it up. So if you notice, it's asking you for a bunch of Nuget packages, and that's what I want to start with. So how do I add Nuget packages? I add them in, again, by going to Nuget. So if I go to my solution, right, I can right-click in both places, either on my solution or on my project. For now, I'll do it in the project. Right-click. It's going to take me to manage Nuget packages on the project side. If I did it on the solution, it would just say manage Nuget packages for solution. Either one is fine. It does the same thing. It takes you here. All right. I've got one update. Remember, jQuery, we're not touching. We're leaving it at 2.2.4. Right now, it shows 3.1.1 somehow. That's incorrect. We have to reduce that. Well, that's the latest version. Sorry, that is the next version. I'm correct. So it's 2.2.4, which is installed. And latest stable is 3.1.1. Please do not update this to 3.1.1 because it will break your bootstrap. Okay, I'm saying it again a bunch of times because if I ask you these questions on the test, you should know, right? Again, things that we've talked about a million times that you should know already by attending class and everything else. Yes? You might. You may need to know everything. Anything I've done in class, you should know how to do, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's time consuming. I'm going to make you get 10 Nuget packages, right? Because you're asking. All right. I'm going to browse, seriously now. I'm going to browse, and I'm going to browse for a specific one. Now, if you notice what it says here, if I look at the one it's looking for this one, Microsoft ASP.NET Identity Entity Framework, right? So this is adding on to our entity framework model. It's using the entity framework to access and create an authorization system. Does it recognize who I am? That's what we're doing right now. Very basic. So I'm going to type that in. I'm going to say, again, Microsoft, right? ASP. You can see it's already there for me because I've already typed this. ASP.NET.Identity. Even if I type lowercase, right, it's going to pull this one up. This is the one you want. Microsoft ASP.NET Identity Entity Framework. Okay, click on that. And then click on the project if you've clicked, because I've clicked on the solution, and then click install. What this is going to do is going to go out, grab that particular Nuget package plus its dependencies, which is Identity Core 2.2.1 as well as Identity Entity Framework 2.2.1, those two. And then click OK. So it's going to install those two pieces. And if you notice now, I've got a couple more of these little check marks here that are good. Now, different parts of the walkthrough ask you for other stuff, and I'm going to install them all at once, right? So here's another one that I need. Look, it's right here. It's Microsoft ASP.NET Identity Owen, right? If you're going to touch that. Now, the reason why it's showing up is because I've got a filter up here, Microsoft.ASP.NET Identity, and Owen is showing right here. Owen is the way we authenticate, right? With identity. One great thing about Owen is, and we'll see this in the second half of the course when we do ASP.NET MVC, right, is it allows us to do stuff like connect to Facebook with OAuth, right? Or authorize ourselves with Google or GitHub or one of those services. We can use a service provider, right, to connect. And OWYN allows us to do that. Click that, and then click Install. So OWYN is the second one. Now, there's going to be a couple of requirements for this one. You see Newtonsoft, a bunch of Microsoft OWYN, security cookies, because it does use cookies, right? Cookie-based authentication. OAuth, there's that OAuth piece I was talking about before, which you can authenticate with other providers, as well as OWYN itself. Okay, click OK. So it installs all that stuff. I accept, and it gets the latest versions. Okay, when it's done, you're going to see a bunch of check marks, right? I want to add in one more, right? And it's going to start off like the same thing. So instead of Microsoft ASP Net, you're going to say Microsoft.OWYN, right? And then .host, and then .system.web. This one here. So Microsoft.OWYN.host.systemweb, and click this one and install. What this does is it links OWYN to our system.web protocol, which is the one we've been using for web forms, right? So it connects, it allows OWYN to connect and authorize through web forms. Okay, click OK, accept, and then it logs it in. Okay, cool. We got some pretty good packages. If you wanted to click installed, right, you can see that. If I click this away, you can see there's a bunch of packages now that are installed, right? Notice also that it says there's an update for a bunch of them, right? So even though I've downloaded them just now, right, it shows me that there's an update. Definitely don't update jQuery. What about these ones? Is it okay to update these security pieces, blah, blah? The answer is yeah. You could probably just click on each one of these, right, kind of thing. And if you wanted to, you could updates. If I go to updates, right, I could check the ones I want to update. So I want this one, this one, this one, and this one. And those are okay, right? You don't want to update jQuery, though, like I said. And then click Update. So I want to do all my updates and get all my packages, latest versions now, right? So I don't have a problem with it. Look at the difference. Like it's going from Newtonsoft 4.5.11 to Newtonsoft 9.01, right? And then from Microsoft OWYN Security 2.1.0 to 3.0. Why would I want that? These are the latest versions and the most secure. They've included patches and a bunch of extra stuff that works. Again, if you're doing this in the real world, you wouldn't do this. Why? You'd probably break your code somewhere, right? So like I said, it'd be like a career limiting move. You could get fired for this kind of stuff, right? But here we're making our own little package, so who cares? That's okay. We want it the most secure and nice. And remember, if we ever have a problem, we can always step it back. I can always go back to a previous version. Not a problem. You just have to know how to do that. All right, so we've updated everything. Let's check out our packages.config file. So I'm going to kind of close this one off. I'm going to double click on my packages.config file. And this is like, for those people who've taken, stuff, we've been together taking things like, if you're COMP229, which is emerging technologies, or if you've worked with Node.js, you might have a package.json file in Node.js. This is your equivalent here on Microsoft. So let's check to see if we have got everything, right? I've got Bootstrap, Entity Framework, Font Awesome, right? jQuery, which is a version 2.2.4, ASP.NET Core, Entity Framework, OWYN, right? The .NET compiler, you need that one. And then it goes right into OWYN host system web, security, cookies, which is right here, OAuth, right? Newtonsoft JSON, right? And then we're missing a couple more, right? I'll tell you right now, because I'm looking at my list, and there's a couple more that I recommend, right? Let's add them in now. So because we're going to use link to connect with everything, right? So we're going to go back up here. This is all the packages we need to make security work properly. You might say, oh my God, lots of packages. Yeah, but once you do it one time, you don't have to think about it again, right? And remember, if you're checking next week, right? And you're like, okay, Tom said to add security. I don't know what package to add in. What are you going to do? You're going to look at your package.config file, right? And you're going to go, oh yeah, it's all this stuff. Does my package.config file match with what it's on GitHub? No, let's add them in, right? And you can find them. So for example, I noticed now on mine that I'm missing a couple. So I'm going to go to manage Nuget Packages, right? And I'm going to add a couple more. So here's the one I'm missing. I'm missing Asp Net Script Manager. So I'm going to just type in ASP.NET.script. If Press enter. And if I press this properly, how about I type it right? ASP Net, like this, ASP Net Script. There we go. And what I want is the script manager for jQuery, this one. Right, so ASP.NET Script Manager, jQuery, right? And then click install. Now, notice it says latest stable version, right? So I want to include this 3.1.1, right? Probably not. Just like, you got to be logical, right? For installing 2.2.4 in jQuery, what would I, launch a script manager that's higher level than that? Okay, cool. That's one. Second, I want to also log in another one, right? Add another one in, which is system. It's right in my thing. .link. So we're using link, the query language that's linking C# and making kind of for to connect with the database. .dynamic, and it's right here, the first one. System.link.dynamic. Okay. I'm going to click install. So again, we check our packages, make sure they're good. If I click on updates, you can see that if there's any updates, they will appear here. For example, the script manager asked me to update, and I'm not going to update because they're just versions of jQuery I don't want. Okay. Cool, we're done. Let's check out that packages.config file one more time. Right. So I wanted to explore this with you today because you can also add additional packages here by typing the package. Remember, this is just XML. The package tag, the ID of the package, right? And Microsoft will load it for you. You can do it that way too. You can also use the package manager console right here to add a package in, right? We'll be using the console in the second part of the second half of the course, right? Because sometimes if we want to do a database migration, right? And in order for us to do a migration, we need to use the console. Right now, we won't need to use that. So we've been using the tool that's built into Visual Studio. Okay? But there's a few ways to kind of add packages, which are like plugins. Think about like libraries that we're adding into our code so we can have more functionality. That's what we're doing it for. Okay. Cool, cool. We got that piece done. Let us, before we do anything else, build, right? Because if we don't build a solution, the new libraries may not be available throughout our entire code, right? It won't propagate properly. Yay. Let's run it the way it was before now. So I got no build issues. I'm just running it vanilla, just like the way it was. We haven't made any changes. And we have a problem. I wanted to point this out to you because as soon as you add ON, right? As soon as you add ON in, it'll ask for a startup file, right? So ON requires a startup file to say, hey, if I'm not logged in properly, where do I go to log in, right? Because this is the first piece of authorization. Authorization requires you to log in. So the program, your application, needs to know where to go for this. And it's all configured within the startup.cs file, right? How do I get that file? Do I want to write it from scratch? Hell no. It'll be written for me, partly, right? Let's get that piece in next, right? I just wanted to point it out. So if you got that error, you're like, hold on. Tom said there's no errors, but when I run it, I get an error. Yeah, because you're missing a file. If you add ON in, right? And again, the ability for us to connect, and that's part of the identity framework, right? We need startup. And the way to do that is right-click on your project. I'm going to click Add, and we're going to go New Item. And under New Item, when it comes up, the New Item dialog comes up, right? And what I want to look for is Startup. So if I click Start like this, and actually, it'll also pull up if you click ON. But this is the one. The ON startup class is the one you want. And you want to rename this thing just to startup instead of startup 1. So instead of startup, you just put startup like down here and press add. Cool. We've got a framework for where everything is going to go. We need to tell ON, though, right, where we're going. How, what do we do when we log in? And here's the first piece of code we're going to do. All right, so you understand what we need. First, whenever we connect with ON, right, for our startup files, we have definitely these two things, Microsoft ON and these using statements, but we need a couple more. I'm going to type them in. So these are required, right, required for ON startup. And these are the two required things. I need, because remember, I'm using identity, right? And I'm going to use cookie authentication, cookie-based authentication. So we're going to do it like this. I need to use using Microsoft.ASP.NET, right, .identity. All right, so I'm going to use that because identity is the framework for our authorization. All right, so I need to add that. Notice that it's not in there by default. Don't know why. Should be, because every time I do it, I always add identity, right? I mean, I guess you could use the old membership system, and that's why it was used that way. So if you wanted to be backwards compatible. Membership was the previous version of authorization we used to use with Microsoft. Now it's identity. We don't use membership anymore, right? It's an older system. Then the next one is using Microsoft.on.security.cookies. So those are the two you need. Don't have those, you won't be successful, right? It's almost like we did that same kind of idea when we used the entity framework. With the entity framework, we have to use that. We have to include the entity framework in for us to connect to the database. Same idea here. We have to include these two pieces so we can connect and use Owen. This is our startup class. And notice that there is a startup method that's part of the class. Here's our class, and there's the configuration method. The configuration is for our startup. You can get rid of this line. This is just a comment. So we can get rid of this, right? And now we're going to add in the pieces that we need. Okay, we're going to say app. We're going to say use cookie authentication, right? Use cookie authentication. And we're going to go new cookie authentication options, right? That's what it's going to be. Now, I'm not going to close it off here. I'm going to open up another folder, another code block like this. So that's the first piece. First piece I'm saying is, hey, use new cookie authentication options as stated below. By the way, do I expect you to remember this? No, right? But I expect you to know that you need a startup file, and this is what you need. You need to point to it right here. So I need to, right here, the only thing, there's two pieces that I need here. One is the authentication type, right? What's the authentication type? Well, notice it's just a bunch of enums, enumerations, right? The default is default authentication types dot application cookie. All right, that's the first one. Next, right, is the login path. Login path is going to be equal to a new path string, right, which we're going to establish. Don't worry if you don't understand or you don't. I'm not expecting you to remember. Login.aspx. Do we have a login.aspx file right now? No. So if we actually weren't authenticated and we're going to a section of our site that needed authentication, it would error out because there's no login.aspx file, right? This is the path that we've set up, and that's why it's so important to set up the startup file, because it tells the application where to go to start up. Now, we don't need this piece because this is just authentication options. Notice that they're separated by, they're just two properties, right? One is, the first property is the authentication type, and the second one is the login path, right? Those are two properties that are part of this use cookie authentication method that we're adding into our app. Notice that app is part of the, it comes from the interface for Owen, right? It's an interface for app builder. I'm building up the app and telling it exactly what my options are for authentication. There are many, many, many other options, okay? We don't really care about them right now. We just want you to make this thing work, okay? Remember, it's like a rapid application development for the web, okay? So we're going to save it, and we've got that piece. Now, will it run the way it is, right? If I press play now, right? If I debug with run with debugging, just by doing that, it should take away my error, right? If it does not, we have to deal with it. Let's see if it does. We're good, okay? So remember, I needed that piece. I needed adding all my, the first part is I added all my my using statements so I can include identity, Owen with entity framework, and all that stuff that we added in, okay? Okay, number one. The second thing is we need a startup file. Without the startup file, we don't know how to log in. Okay, that's the second thing we need. Okay, we need to make some changes to our nav bar, and I'm going to explain this a little bit in detail, right? This nav bar is nice. For example, if I go to students now, right, here's students. I can get to students, but I want my students to be locked. I don't want anybody to be able to get to students, right? The only people that I want to be able to see a student list is an authenticated user, an authorized, someone who's authorized to see the student list, right? So again, authentication, right, is who are you? Authorization is what can you do, right? Those two things, right? And we're going to talk about that again in detail in the second half of the course. All right, so authentication, if I want to make this so this page, in order for me to get to my students page, you need authentication. There's a couple of ways to do that. And the easiest way that I'm going to show you is in the web config file. All right, so let's do that. Let's go into, I want to make it fail. I want to stop anyone from being able to get into students at all, right? A couple of things to do. We got to think about all the stuff that we want to hide. I want to hide students as an example. So I want to hide my student details and my students file, and I want to place them somewhere where only someone who's authenticated can access them. Chances are the nicer way to do it is to put it inside of another folder, right? And so that way, I mean, I can certainly authenticate based on a single site, single page, but that's crazy. If I told web config every single page that I want people to authenticate to, it's a lot of work, right? But what if I told, the web config file that I want this entire folder to be protected, right? That makes more sense, right? I'll show you both ways. So how do we do this web config stuff? Is it difficult, at all? And the answer is no, it's not really difficult. You just got to know where to look in order for this authentication piece to take hold. So this is the second part I want to show you, how to set up the authentication piece. So I'm going to look in web.config. All right, there's two parts to this. First part is protect. Second part is set up a database that's going to store all my user data, right? I don't have that right now. I only have one connection, right? My only connection that I have right now, this connection string, is my Contoso connection to connect to my data from my student and everything else. I need to make another one in here. We're going to show you how to do that, right? Now, some people may use only one connection, right? The Contoso connection could be the same one that you authenticate with too. I don't recommend, okay? We'll talk about this later on. For now, I want you to skim all the way to the bottom where it says runtime. And now we're going to add in a location. So I'm going to go with something like this. I'm going to say location, right? That's going to be added in underneath the runtime, right? Location. This is inside my web.config. Okay, good. Now, what I need to do inside there is identify the path. What's my path that I want to protect, right? And usually it's an absolute path. But for example, I want students.aspx to be protected. What is it going to be? I can just simply go like this. I can say, well, it's going to be students, right, .aspx. Let's try it a couple ways, and we'll see that if this path works or not, right? Or if it's just students, like this. What do you think it's going to be? This, or this? Right? We're going to talk about that in a second, right? Second, once we identify the path, we want to kind of specify what happens when we authenticate. So we need a couple of layers here. One is system.web. Remember we talked about adding system.web with Owen and all that? This is why, because system.web is web forms, right? Okay, next, we want to specify authorization. There's two. There's authentication and authorization, right? Here, we are authenticating with Owen, but we're authorizing in the web config file, right? So authorization is going to be in here. Now, look at the layers. So we need location, system web, authorization, and the last one is going to be what happens with users that are not logged in. Well, we want to say something like this. Deny, there's also allow and deny, right? We want to deny, right, users that equal to question mark. And what question mark actually equals to is not authenticated, unauthenticated users. Okay, that's it. And now, if we did this properly, and by the way, we're going to work on this one, student.aspx. I want you to work on it and see which one's the right thing to do. Let's run this thing and see what happens when I access my students.aspx file now, right? So I'm going to go kind of click run, right? And it builds everything. If there was an error in the build, it wouldn't have built everything. So if the web.config file was wrong, right? Now if I click students, does it go? It says error in the application, right? It says the resource cannot be found, and the resource you are looking for, or one of its dependencies, cannot be found. What is it looking for? Look, login.aspx, right? It's looking for that. We told you we don't have that, right? So it's going to take us to log in because we're not authenticated. So it was right. It's the way I did it when I go over here. When I put in my web.config, right? And I just put in students.aspx, that was wrong, right? Or that was right. I mean, it basically said, hey, this is the path, right? If someone goes there and they're not authenticated, block them. That's how easy it is. Now remember, this is all done on the server side. Even though we've exposed it here, web.config is not available to any common user. They can't see that, right? It's hidden, right? So they can't get access to this thing. Step 1. 2, we need them to go to a login page. Am I going to make you write a login page from scratch? Hell no. We're going to get that code first, right? It may not be operational, but I'll get it working. So let's add that in. So I'm going to add a new page. So right-click. I'm going to add a new page. So I'm going to go new web form with master page, right? And we're going to call it login. Here's our login form. Site master is going to be our page, right? Just like we did before. Now we've got an empty page. Yay! Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get that code snippet that I put up on eCentennial, right? And again, if you go back on eCentennial, it's right over here. Here's my login, right? And I can download it or I can look at it right here. Take a look. It's right here available to you, right? So if I want to grab this stuff here, and again, I want to kind of grab all this, copy it, right? And then go over to here, and between the content, I want you to paste it in. It may not look great. It might actually add additional spaces and stuff. Don't worry about that. All right, let's press save and see what we got, right? What have I added in? Let's take a look at this. One is I've got a status label. The status label is going to be, we're going to use a special class, right, that I'm making called alert flash, right? That is a CSS class we're going to make, right? The alert flash is going to pop up, and it's going to say alert danger. So alert danger is from it's a Bootstrap class that colors that whole part red. It's like almost like a little square that makes it red. And for you guys to see where that is, right, you can go to the Bootstrap class right here, get Bootstrap, right? And if I was going to look at CSS, and if I scroll all the way down, I want to see different kinds of images. I don't think it's here, actually. It's under, it may not be under buttons. It may be under components, sorry. Basically, if you look down, here's alerts, right? If you look at alerts, you can see what an alert flash looks like. This is what it's going to look like, right? Now, this is nice, right? This is what it is. This is an alert danger. That's what this thing is, right? However, if I just code it like this, and if I go back to my code for a second, notice that I have an ID for my div tag here, right? Where the label is going to show my status, right? And it's alert flash. And in order for this to work, I need to update my CSS, and that's why I've included that little snippet in my code. So I'm going to right-click on my content, right? Notice I should have an app.css already, right? And I have a little piece of code in here. I want you to remove this and replace it with the code that I've given you in your snippet, right? So if you look at the snippet, remember this is not a CSS course. If I go to my CSS, this is right here, the second last one on eCentennial, and I click onto it, you're going to see all this stuff. If I edit it, right, notice it says skip to the content, this repository, search, pull request, blah, 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 blah. All I need is this right here from my sticky note right here, sticky footer styles, all the way down to the bottom right here. Okay, so copy it, go across, and remove this, and replace it with this. This is what you should see. So this is my sticky footer style, right? I've kind of updated that, so my footer style is better. All I've gotten is a little code snippet there. I also did some custom paging. We're going to do some paging. We're going to fix up later on for our tables. I've added custom paging in here, right? As well as some additional other things that I've added in. All right. Okay. Again, really super important for us to make this work. I've added this piece of CSS in there, just so that way it's colored properly. Yay! All right, let's run the login page. So if I actually have the login page open, and I click debug, right, run with debugging, it'll actually show me a debug version of the login page. Let's try this out, right? So you can see what it's going to look like as a preview, right? So it'll say like login, right? Cool. I like it. It's this compilation error. I got a button that I'm missing, the login button that's missing. right? We're going to make this login button work. But for now, what I want you to do is take this piece right here of this on-click event. That's why this is happening. This on-click event is saying, I'm looking for the login button click event. I don't have that right now. So let's just remove that for testing. Okay? Remember, this is a code snippet. So I've already kind of coded it up for you. So let's go back in here. And I want to just get rid of this. We'll put it back later. So save and run it again. I want to run it so when you see the code snippet, you'll see what it is, what it does, right? It's important for you to understand this, how it works. Even though we've done a code snippet, this is what it looks like. It's a very simple login page. I'll put it up a little bigger. So there's a username and password, okay, and a login button. The login button right now, she no worky, right? Doesn't do anything right now, right? Well, you should be able to get to this page, okay? Now this is good because if I click on students, so first of all, if I go home, and then I click students, I'm not authenticated. It should take me to the login page if we're right. So click on students, bam, login page, right? Because it's trying to see if I'm authenticated, which I'm not, right? So authorization is already working. I can't get to that page. But what a pain in the ass that would be if I had to go through every single page. Imagine that. I have 50 pages on my site. I have to go through each one of them, put them on my web config file. That's just nuts, right? So it's way better for us to put this page inside of a folder and protect the whole folder. How do we do that? So I'm going to go into this. Again, very, very simple stuff, guys. Nothing spectacular about what I'm doing. I'm going to just shut this down for a second. Right-click on my folder, on my project. I'm going to add a new folder. Add a new folder. There it is. And the new folder I'm going to call Contoso because we're using a Contoso University. There it is. There's my Contoso folder. Here's what I want to do, right? I want to grab my student details and my student.aspx page, these two pages right here, right? And I want to drag them. I want to drag these two pages inside of my Contoso folder like this, right? Done. That moves them in, right? Okay, there's still a problem. I got a number of problems now. One is my link on my nav bar is incorrect, right? I can't go to my student details or my students page from my nav bar anymore. My nav bar is wrong. Let's go back and fix that just to show you what I'm talking about here. Because in my nav bar, if I look at my site master, here's my site master page. In my site master, you can see that when I click on courses or students or whatever I'm going to click on, it just goes directly to that ASPX page. But it's not in there anymore. It's inside Contoso, right? So I got to go Contoso/students.aspx. And what I really want to do, I'm just going to do one, is /Contoso. That's the link. Okay, let's check this out and see if it works. So I'm going to save it. Little changes, one little change at a time, so I can show you what has to change, right? And then if we change this one, guess what also has to change? The link inside of my students to go point to student details, and the link from my cancel button to go back. Those are all things we need to do, right? Because we've modified the links to the page. It doesn't automatically modify the links for you. Sorry. Run. It's going to pull up my page, and now my nav bar will be, should point to the right place, right? Again, if you want to check that, if you hover over your nav bar link, so if I hover over students, on the bottom you should see where it's going to go, Contoso students.aspx, and this should take you, if I click on there, right in. Uh-oh, what happened? Well, I didn't protect it anymore, right? It doesn't exist. That students page, students.aspx, doesn't exist in my web config, right? It's gone. So of course it's not going to protect. Let's put it back. Let's make sure it's protected. How do I do that? I'm going to go back to my web config file, scroll all the way down where it says the location information, and instead of students.aspx, what am I going to put in there? Contoso by itself, like this. Once I put this in there, Contoso, that whole folder is blocked. Guys, this is one part of that you need for assignment for your project number 1, right? You need this piece. All the stuff that I'm talking about with you today is all the things you need for your assignment, which is due next week, right? By the way, we will do a little bit of a check and X today too. See if you've got any kind of progress on your part 2 of your assignment today, right? So let's take a look and see how that works, right? here's my web config, and let's run it and see now what happens. So I run this thing again. I should see my nav bar, right? But now when I click on my students, because it's looking inside Contoso, that's where it exists. It's defending. I want you to think about it as defending this whole folder. If I click on students, it should take me to my login page. So now that whole thing is blocked, is completely blocked up. So that way, whether I type it by hand, so if I type in something like this, if I go instead of my login, if I type in something like, Contoso students, right? Press enter, right? It's going to take me right here. If I go home, if I type in by default, so let's say someone remembers the link and they type it by hand. So Contoso students, right? And I type it in, right to my login page. So you can't break this authentication. It's not like you can type it in by hand if they don't have a link and it's going to fail, right? Remember that if it's failing for you, chances are you haven't removed the link or the automatically generated event handler for the login button, right? Take that out and it shouldn't fail anymore. All right, so let's review what we've done in this first part. We've set up OWYN and identity. We did that by using Nuget Packages. We loaded them in. And we updated our packages.config file. We need to do that. That's number one. 2, we use our web config file to secure parts of our website, right? That's what we're going to use for that, right? And we can do both individual pages as well as entire folders, which is much more efficient, right? Every time I want to secure a folder, I need to have this structure, right? So for example, I need to have a location with its own path, right? And I want to put it underneath the runtime, right? It can't, but it's inside the configuration key, right? Here's my configuration tag. Inside the configuration tag, but underneath the runtime tag is where I'm going to put all my location tags. Okay? And you can authenticate or whatever, anything you like. We're going to talk about other ways of doing it. If I want a specific person to have access to a specific place, we can do that too. So we can only allow certain users to have access, right? Example, if I'm going to be an admin for my users, all my users, right? I want to do user-based administration. I don't want just someone logged in to do it. I want a specific person to do it, the admin user, right? And we can do that by specifying the user as well. Questions around this before I put it up on GitHub, and then we'll take a short break. It's not a lot. Again, remember, I've got my Contoso in there. Oh, one thing we should test is when we actually log in, right? If I want to go to my students page, just for a second, and I want to go to my student details page, because both those are going to need to be modified. My students page, for sure. Notice that the link goes to student details, right? Will this link work? Think again. What's the relative path from my Contoso database, right? My relative path says I'm going to go, it's inside the same place. So this would work, right? Do I have to modify anything? No. However, what about inside my student details page? My student details page goes back, right? And it's the cancel button that happens. It's caused on the back end. So if I right click and if I go back to view code, notice that it redirects exactly to students.aspx. This is incorrect, this path, right? This path should take us into Contoso, right? So it should be like this. It should be Contoso/students. That's what you need to do to update that. If you don't update this path, you'll never get back to the students list, right? Same thing down here. Notice there's both, right? Contoso and then students, right? Because that's the absolute path. So whether you're doing something like saving changes, right, in your student, like actually editing, or sorry, deleting, or adding, right? Or if you're just canceling and going back, you need to change the path because the path would be incorrect. Okay. Again, let's see what we've done. If I go to Team Explorer and go to Changes, lots of changes. You notice I've added some stuff in content. I've added a whole section, a whole folder called Contoso. My login page, so far, I've kind of scaffolded out a bit of a login page. I don't have the back end that's working right now. I just have a login page so far, right? My site master page has been updated to include a new link. My startup.cs file is required to let the program know when it has OWYN, where to go to log in if someone's not authenticated. You need this piece, right? And the web config has been updated with specific details about how to authorize, what my authorized users can do. Okay? So let's update this. I'm going to say added identity /ON authentication. And we'll say basic setup. Commit all, right? Go home. And then I'm going to go to sync and push. Now, if you didn't get any of that stuff, please look on GitHub because you'll have the updated files there, okay? As well as all the files that we did, like on my login page, you should now be able to see, okay? Again, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue with this crazy stuff.